Last week, Steve started a new series that we're calling Yahweh, the names of God. And we're going to be looking at the compound names of God found in the Old Testament. If you missed that introduction last week, or if you miss any of the weeks, you can go onto the website and download the podcast on whatever way it is you listen to podcasts, so you can always stay up to date with the message that we bring every Sunday morning. But last time we said that really this is a series where we're taking the time to reflect on the character of God and what God is like. And as we do this, we're reminded of the time that God first revealed his name to us via Moses in the book of Exodus. But up to that point, God's name was Elohim. Elohim that came in the beginning. Elohim made the heaven and the earth. And Elohim is the Hebrew name for creator. So creator, God. But Moses and the people of God, he gave the name, he was known as Yahweh. He was known as Yahweh. And Yahweh is the name that occurs just under about 7,000 times in the Old Testament. And actually it appears in all but the books of Esther, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs. It doesn't appear in those books. But Yahweh was the sacred personal name of Israel's God. And we see the name of God was revealed at different times in different stories. And as it was revealing parts of his identity, the essential nature of his character, of who he is, the I am Yahweh. We also learned that when God's name was revealed in certain times, it was also an invitation to intimacy with him, into a relationship with him. And it was a real privileged place to be able to access. And we know that ourselves, don't we? When we know someone's name, it gives us a different meaning to that person. You know, if we were like walking down a busy street and Steve decided he was going to step out into the road and I just shouted, "Oh, don't cross," I could be speaking to like 20 people in the street. To be fair, I might forget his name and he would be dead. But if I remembered his name and shouted, "Steve," he's more likely to stop and turn around, isn't he? And so it becomes a different thing when we want to address someone by their name. And Moses, we looked at Moses becoming a man on first name terms with the creator of the universe, an invitation that we also have. And so throughout the Old Testament, we see these compound names used, the names of God. And when Yahweh was used, sometimes it came as Yahweh, but sometimes there was a description added to it. And it may seem small and incomplete, but it's a way for us to understand what God is like. And actually, this is a little plug, last term in our small group, I'm part of the online city group. And last term, we actually started looking at this book called Pray in the Names of God. There might be a slide. And it's like 52 weeks looking at the compound names of God. And we had great fun looking at this. There's so many names of God in this book. And actually, I don't know what the word is, but I like to start basic. And this is a really good book for that. And it kind of introduces those names of God and where they came in. And it's an opportunity to learn those things, learn a bit of the name and how to kind of use it in everyday prayer. So if you want to go deeper past what we're doing here on a Sunday morning, I can really recommend this book. Anyway, so last week, Steve looked at the name Yahweh Shema. And Yahweh Shema is found in the book of Ezekiel. I had to do that, didn't I? And Yahweh Shema means God is there or God is present. And we looked at this idea that in the midst of the things that we're experiencing, our suffering, our pain, he is there in the midst of it. He's not impassible. He's not beyond. And he's not understanding. We can connect with him in all of our experiences because he is the God that is there. And this week, we're going to be looking at Yahweh Shalom. God is peace. God is peace. And we may have a lot of pictures that we think of in that moment when we're thinking about God being peace. The literal dictionary definition is that of being in a state of tranquility, being free from disturbance, being in a time where there is no war. Maybe for some of us, we're a little bit older and we think of a time where it was all love and peace posters and signs being made. Maybe we think about sitting in a room with a box of fluffy kittens or puppies or goat yoga or whatever the latest thing is. Maybe we think of pink fluffy unicorns and rainbows and lots of things like that. The world being in harmony, like the Coca-Cola commercial. But doesn't peace seem like an intangible place to reach on the most part? Maybe it actually fills you with dread when you hear, let's talk about peace. Maybe you picture when world leaders gather to have peace talks. And what generally happens is that people get angered about the peace talks because peace never comes. And so there's usually some sort of violent response that takes place. People ramp up their action. And it makes no sense because violence as a response to peace doesn't measure up even to the secular definition that we have of peace. Any form of peace that we can probably imagine falls short of what shalom really means. The God of peace, Yahweh Shalom, is so much more. And it's probably slightly more gritty than it is fluffy. The God of peace is like the eye of the storm. So I don't know if you've ever seen, like on the news, when they talk about these massive hurricanes, often in Florida, these storms happen and everything is being ravaged. The atmosphere is just swirling. And right in the center, as the storm's passing over, everything falls still, like not even the birds like make a noise. And God is like that eye. Everything is being ravaged, but in this moment, there's a sense of stillness. And that stillness reminds us it's going to be okay. But you're in the eye, so you know the storm's coming and you know you're going to have to bear it. The storms won't bypass you in life. But is God at the center of it for you? Is he at the center reminding you that it will be okay? Because the storm may bring damage, but God is there to remind you that the promises he has for your life won't be. And there's peace in that. Yahweh Shalom, the Lord is peace. And actually in Hebrew, that meant wholeness in life. It meant a completeness, that you would be prosperous, that you would be satisfied, that you would be in safety. And actually, the only source of those things is in God. You cannot get wholeness, completeness, prosperity, and satisfaction from anything else in your life except from God, because if you do, it will not be true peace. It won't be lasting. But we're going to be continuing our story today on understanding that. And so we're going to be turning to the book of Judges. But a bit of a backdrop of that so far, you know, when we think we jump into Judges, but there's a bit of text that goes ahead of that. And so far, what has happened through the first part of the Old Testament, God has established his covenant with Israel through Abraham in Genesis. And then we have Exodus, where God leads his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt under Moses' leadership. You know, the big parting of the Red Sea so they could escape. They've walked through the desert. They've looked for the promised land. They've been encountering many miracles. Then in Joshua, the book before Judges, they've made it to the promised land. It's flowing with milk and honey. It's a good life. But then Joshua dies and things begin to descend and spiral into chaos. And it is chaotic. And so they're looking for a way to manage people, and they want to establish law and order in the land. And so they appoint a group of people to look after them, hence the name Judges. And we are going to be joining Judges in the story in chapter 6. And so the Israelites have come to a point where they've forgotten God, who he is, and they've worshipped gods of the land, namely Baal worship. And they were a people, or had become a people, with no sense of purpose. They had no spiritual vision. They'd lost any sense of discipline to the Lord. And so the trouble had come from the form of the Midianite oppression. And the Midianites, who we're going to read about, were superior in their battle against the Israelites. And for 7 years, the Lord gave them into the hand of the Midianites. You know, for every harvest season over those 7 years, the crops would go, the Israelites would plant the crops, they'd grow, and in would come the Midianites to plunder the land. They were like a swarm of locusts. They would just take and destroy everything. And every time Israel would flee, and they would go and live in caves, upon the hills, in the mountains, in shelters, because the power of the Midian was so oppressive. And eventually, they cried for help. And God would raise up an ordinary young man named Gideon. And so we're going to join chapter 6 in verse 7, where Gideon is found in the ground in a wine press. So here we go. Stick with me. It's a long read. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us to the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon replied, If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me." Actually, Gideon, if you read, was a man of signs. He liked his signs. If he was going to do something, he needed a sign. You can read earlier on in Judges about the story of the wet fleece and then the story of the dry fleece. And I love that's what I love about Gideon. He asked God for a sign in order to move. Even though this angel is here talking to him, he still needs a sign. So I'm thinking, we have a bit of trouble sometimes discerning God's voice. We're in good company. Anyway, "Please do not go away," it says, "until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid. You are not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." And to this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abizarite. You know, what a great story. You know, what we hear in verse 7 straight away is an insight, isn't it, into Gideon's mind. We don't even know what he's thinking, but he's threshing wheat in a winepress to hide from the Midians. He's already feeling weak. You know, a winepress for Gideon would have been the complete opposite to how he would have used to have been operating. You know, to thresh wheat, you would have to be above ground, and the weather would have to be in perfect condition, dry with wind. And so what they would do is they would throw the crop up in the air, and the wind would separate the wheat, you know, from the two bits, the wheat and the chaff. So the wind would give it that bit of sense of separating, so it wouldn't all have to be done by hand. But a wine press was a hole. It was like a massive hole dug deep in the ground, and they would climb into it and then squelch the grapes, and there'd be a little channel where it would run off. And so often it would feel like a lonely environment down there. So he'd gone from being out in the elements to down, hiding in a ground, feeling sorry for himself. He was hiding. He was probably a bit grumpy too, feeling this oppressive place. You know, and so when the angel of the Lord comes to him and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," I'm not sure he felt like a mighty warrior hiding in a winepress to save the food that they had. Mighty warrior. But actually, it's a common theme in the Bible. You may have recognized this as you've read, that God often assigns your identity before you know what the task is. For God, the indicative always comes before the imperative. The identity is given first. You know, if you find that in your life, it's an endless pursuit of activities, and you're waiting through the activities you're doing for God's divine like button to be pressed because you want him to approve you because you're doing all the right things, you need to change that. He already approves of you. He already likes you. We have been given the identity of being his children. We don't have to perform to get his like. We have his approval. And because we have his approval, that's what drives us to do the things that he asks us to do. His identity is upon us first. You have that identity. Sorry, side note. Anyway, I love Gideon's response. And I almost think when I read this, I can't imagine Gideon where in his situation, because I was thinking him of being like totally British in this response. And I'm like, "Pardon me, my lord." It's a bit like that. It's like, "Pardon me, lord." I wonder if it might be a little bit, you know, sarcastic, very British. Like, I'm not sure if you noticed, I'm in the ground, hiding, trying to preserve my dignity, trying to save some food. And it's a bit horrible down here. Did you notice that? You know, because if the Lord is with me, if the Lord is with us, why has this happened? Why has this happened? Where are all the wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, "Did the Lord not bring us up out of Egypt?" The Lord has abandoned us here. He's given us to the hand of the Midian. It just made me feel like it's a bit familiar. You know, God has given some clear instructions on how to live and how it's best for them to live. They ignored it. And now they're suffering the consequences, but God is to blame. And I thought, as I did a quick check back in my mind of how my life story has been. But straight away, Gideon did two things. He questioned the identity that God gave him. He questioned being that warrior. Like, have you noticed? I'm not sure that's me. And he also questioned the legitimacy of God, because he said, Lord, the Lord has abandoned us. Where are you, God? Why are you doing this to me? And I think, how often has that been our cry? Maybe it's even our cry right now. In the midst of a strange place, in a difficult state of mind, maybe you feel like you've given and you've given and you've tried and you've tried and you're struggling to see where God is in any of it. That just feels like there's no return. Where is God? Maybe your energy is focused on work or school or relationships or things that you think you're meant to be doing, and none of it seems to be working out. Where are your miracles? Where are your wonders? Where are they? What does the Lord say about that? What is his response? Well, it was this. It said, the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of the Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? And what I love about the response, firstly, God doesn't have to answer, but he does, because he's God. And he could have said something like, well, don't worry about it. Just get on with it. We're not going to talk about that. He doesn't talk about it. But what he does do is he speaks life over the situation, the current situation that is in. He says, go in the strength you have, Gideon. I am here. I am sending you. You are a mighty warrior. I am with you. God doesn't say to Gideon, yeah, I recognize life isn't so good at the moment. Sorry about the whole Midian thing. You take a moment to take some time out in the hole, carry on doing what you need to do. And when you feel okay and everything's all right again, I'll come back. Sorry about that. He doesn't say any of that. He says to Gideon, the youngest and least of his tribe, rise, mighty warrior, and I will send you with the strength you have. And he's sending him into battle. He's sending him into battle against the most destructive army in the land. And we're like, what, God? What? And this is why Gideon asked for a sign, because it's like, this is a bit crazy. You're sending me? And it's no surprising there was doubt in his thoughts, and he needed confirmation, because who doesn't? We sometimes need that, don't we? God speaks, but we're like, I'm really not sure. And then the angel does the most amazing miracle of touching the rock with his staff, and the fire flares up from the center of it. Gideon asked, and he saw, and he knew that God was with him and that he wouldn't die. And so he built that altar there to the Lord and called it, the Lord is peace. And to this day it stands. And so with that in mind, I want to look at three things about God and God is peace and what that might look like to us. Because firstly, God is peace, and he was peace in the dirt. Where did God go? That was the question. Where are you, God? But what I love about God is that he came and met Gideon in the winepress. He came and met him at the hole in the ground, where he may have been feeling a whole host of things. He would have been exhausted, maybe angry this was happening. Maybe he felt shame that he was having to hide. He was feeling abandoned. And this same God is the one that comes and meets with us when we're in the winepress, when we're feeling a bit in the dirt of our lives. He comes to the spaces, even the spaces where we have ignored him, and the spaces where we have blamed him, in the spaces where we have questioned his every decision. He gets in with us in all his perfection, in all his cleanliness. he gets down. You know, his whole narrative, if you're still unsure of who God is, his whole narrative has been one to come down and meet with us, to dwell with us on earth, his only son, to die alone on a cross. And so when we're in it and we're thinking, does he know? He knows that abandonment. And he chooses even now through his Holy Spirit to be in us, to be with us, as we looked at last week, to understand our mess and our pain. Even when we're into those wine presses from our very own nature, God's peace is so much more than us being in a happy, sanitized, healthy space. He comes to the dirt. He isn't afraid to be with us. The best thing is that he never leaves us there. Because secondly, God's peace is restorative. In the raging storm of life, God speaks. He speaks right through it, and he speaks life. As he spoke life over Gideon, his true identity, mighty warrior, he speaks life to us. He doesn't say, come and rest on this cloud of rainbows and fluffy kittens. God restores your identity to you. Knowing your true identity will bring you peace. God wants you to be restored to him. He who created you, Elohim. And he has done this through his salvation. And when you come to faith in Jesus, God has already reckoned that righteousness as ours straight away. It's not something that you're having to attain. Justification is God treating us not as we are, but as we shall be. He has already given us the identity of being his child. You are a child of God. And when we pray, God, give us peace, we are praying that God will bring his wholeness. He will bring us into that wholeness, that he will bring us life, that he will bring us completeness, that he will bring his prosperity, that he will bring his health, his welfare. He will restore our hearts and our bodies, our lives to him how it was meant to be. But sometimes, just as Gideon was called, sometimes to see that restoration, we have to go to war. We have to battle. We have things in and upon our lives that we cannot change unless we go into battle, and we have to be ready for that. There is no fluffy place that we can go to lead us out of some of the messes that we're in. If you're hiding in the winepress, the call to battle is here. And to go to battle, you need to know that you are a mighty warrior, that you are a child of God. God is saying to you, go in the strength you have, because am I not sending you? And he sends us. Sometimes we can't wait until we think that we're recovered, because daily we might be called to battle. God has called us, and we can stay in the ground, in the hiding place, being the person that we believe we are. We can stay buried with the things that we speak over ourselves. We can stay in the winepress and in the dirt, or we can respond to God's calling to battle. Which leads to the next point, that we battle because God's peace is courageous. Pardon me, my lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. And then he goes to build the altar. At this point, God was not leading Gideon to a nice, safe place to be protected from the Midians. He was leading Gideon into battle. The battle because God knew that needed to happen in order for breakthrough and victory to take place. And it wasn't just breakthrough and victory for Gideon. It was breakthrough and victory for the people. It was beyond himself. And it may feel terrifying if you think that God is leading you into battle, particularly if you feel like you've been fighting the Midianites and you've never won. Gideon wanted a surety, didn't he? He wanted a surety because clearly the angel appearing and speaking wasn't quite enough. There was no evidence that it might have been God. He needed a sign. And maybe that's what you're looking for. You know, I've never been in the actual army, so I can't relate to that call. But maybe you are or have been to war. And I can't imagine the courage required for that. But maybe some, if not most of us, could relate to this. Beep, 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 or some other horrendous noise at 6 a.m. in the morning, alarm cutting through your sleep. Wasn't much of a sleep anyway. You forced yourself after a few presses of the snooze button to get out of bed. Before the days began, you're thinking of the million things to do before you can even leave for work. Maybe the things you forgot yesterday. Maybe you've already started by reading your emails or a text. You realise your day isn't going to go well already. Maybe you've already got up, you've stubbed your toe on the way to the bathroom, which is clearly a sign that everything's going to go downhill from this point. Maybe you've been up 4 times in the night to a crying child or sick child. Maybe you've been ill. Maybe you've had a restless night. And it's taken everything out of you just to get out of bed this morning. You get dressed, you start daily chores. Maybe you reply to another email. If you've got children, you're getting them ready for the day ahead. School, nursery, childminders, teenagers, partners, everyone's being difficult. Or maybe you're alone and it's a lonely start and you're longing for human touch, for the first conversation of the day, for somebody to already notice you. Maybe it's too quiet. Maybe the anxiety sets in. You need to get off. You need to get the kids to school. You need to go to work. The commute is packed. Everything needs doing yesterday. You've forgotten your lunch. You've forgotten everyone's lunch. You've forgotten it might be dress-up day. You've already argued with your teenager or your partner. You're jostling through traffic and you're exhausted, and it's not even 9 a.m. yet. Your mind is already weighted with the pressures of the day, or the anxiety that set in when you woke up, and the burden of being enough or doing enough, making sure that everyone around you has what they need. Maybe there's moments in the day you remember all the things you forgot to do yesterday, and you're working hard. You're concentrating, getting the things right at work that you need to get done. And before you realise it, you've barraged through the day, through lunch, people are clocking out, you've not done anything on your to-do list. Your co-worker's been coughing and sneezing all day, and now you're not only late, but you're covered in germs and you're going to have to rush home. Maybe you're home and straight into crazy family life, or maybe you're alone. Maybe you're not alone, but you feel alone. The requests, the noises causing you to be distracted. You can't be bothered to make a healthy dinner. So it's fast food or unhealthy food, and you feel guilty instantly that you don't provide an Instagrammable worthy meal. You're full of regret. You haven't been to the gym for 3 years. So you're just out of the routine. And you go through the routine of your evening. Maybe you're out again. Maybe you're still alone, but still with the burden of the day. And you think about calling a friend or a family member. But you understand they have no idea what you actually do. And so their well-meaning advice doesn't help. And so it's just as exhausting as it was yesterday. And you get ready for bed and you wonder if God is even in your life. But then you also feel guilty because you forgot actually to invite him in to that day and you haven't spoke to him. And you wouldn't blame him if there was no purpose to your life. But you also wonder, does he care just a little bit? And as you lay heavy on your bed, it's midnight and your brain wants to remind you of all the things you did wrong when you were 10 and you drift off to sleep, being disturbed again in your thought. Beep, beep, beep. It's 6 a.m. You're exhausted. But here is what you need to know. You are at war. You are at war. You're being hit every single day. You know, the enemy completely has designed things in your life to distract you every hour of the day, just to distract you from living. From living. That's his purpose. He doesn't want you to come in to the presence of God. He's perfectly designed that for you to be distracted. And God is cutting through that and is calling you out. Rise, mighty warrior. Go in the strength you have. The Lord is with you. You can't wait for life to be still to find the peace of God. That stillness is never going to come. And peace in your life isn't not having things going on. It's not having no storm. It's knowing him, that he is with you. And you might be sitting here thinking, I'm not a mighty warrior though, but you're wrong. God's peace comes to you, and it comes to you when you're in the dirt. It comes to you in the winepress. And God's peace comes to you because he wants to restore you. And he needs you to come to him. Because God's peace to you is you being courageous again. It's in the knowledge and understanding that you can do all things in God who sends you. Peace is about who God is and what he wants to bring to your life. You cannot manufacture peace. You cannot manufacture Yahweh Shalom, wholeness in life, that completeness, that welfare, that safety. He is our source for all these things. And you need to know that every day God is saying that to you. I am with you. Rise, mighty warrior. You know, and Gideon got out of that winepress and he led an army of 300 to battle against the Midianites. And the result of that victory was peace for the Israelites for 40 years. For 40 years in that one response. So I want us to stand. I want us to stand for a minute.